Hey guys, this video tutorial aims to assist you in your ability to break down the question. So to be able to identify what it's actually asking you to do, and also to be able to reflect then on your writing to make sure that you actually have addressed the question and requirements. To begin, we need a sample question. The question provided asks you to explain the relationship between the artist and world as presented through their artworks. The first thing that you need to do is identify the verb. This is the action word and highlights what the question is actually asking you to do. Now, in this particular question, the verb is explain. And explain means to relate cause and effect, make the relationship between things evident, or provide why and or how. Okay, so essentially this is asking you to look at the relationship between different things and how one is impacting upon the others. Okay, so that would ask you to consider the relationship between what, and the answer is found further in the question. As a side note, for this question, obviously the verb is explain, but it won't always be. So if you visit the Border Studies website in order to access the glossary keywords, you'll be able to find the meaning of multiple glossary terms that you may come across across your schooling. Now that you have identified the verb, the second step is to identify the content area. Okay, so what are you actually required to talk about? Now, in visual arts, there are 3 content areas that you may be asked to explore. The first one is practice. Now, practice is broken up into 2 parts. Firstly, art making, which refers to obviously the making of art. So this can be your own art making practice as an artist, or the art making practice of an artist you have studied. Now, on the other side, we have critical and historical studies. Now, critical studies requires you to look at the judgment that is being made, so someone's evaluation of a work, whereas historical studies is more of a biographical placement within a context or time and place. Okay, so that basically is what is meant by practice. Now, when you're given a question that focuses on practice, usually the term practice is presented within the question. Now, the second content area is conceptual framework. Now, the conceptual framework is concerned with the relationships between the 4 agencies. The 4 agencies are world, artwork, audience, and artist. Now, just to give you a quick breakdown, the world refers to what is happening at the time. The artwork is a physical representation of ideas. The artist is obviously the person who creates the artwork, and the audience is the viewers of the work, and that can be general public, art critics, art historians, journalists, etc. Now, the third content area is known as the frames, and there are 4 of them: the postmodern, subjective, cultural, and structural. Now, the postmodern frame is concerned with how an artwork challenges the mainstream, so challenges what is traditionally considered art in a way. Now, the subjective is more a personal response or personal approach to creating art, so how it is a reflection of deeply felt experiences or feelings. Now, the cultural frame focuses more on cultural ideologies that are being presented, so things of gender, class, social status, etc. Now, the structural frame, on the other hand, is looking at how something is being composed, so how it's been put together. So you're looking at the compositional components of the work: line, colour, texture, etc. Within a question, you'll be asked to focus on one of these content areas. So you will need to be able to identify which of these content areas are actually the focus of the question. In order to do that, you're looking for keywords that indicate what content area is actually being addressed. Okay, so within this particular question, hopefully you will notice that the terms artist, world, and artworks have been presented to you. Now, the other keyword that is highlighted within this question is relationship. Okay, and as I said previously, the conceptual framework is concerned with the relationship between the different agencies. In this case, the three agencies of artist, world, and artwork. Okay, so in identifying the content areas being the conceptual framework, you can then further break down the information that you've been provided. So, for example, artists, you're looking at who actually made the work. All right, so this is you identifying the artist or artists that you will be discussing in your response. Now, the world, you're looking at what was actually happening in the world at the time. Now, draw focus only to the events that were inspiring or influencing the artist, okay? So please make sure that you're only talking about relevant information. All right, also the artworks, all right, so this requires you to include the titles of the work. Essentially, this becomes the evidence, so what you will use to back up your arguments, all right? And for that reason, you need to be able to identify or just talk about how these artworks represent the ideas of the artist, and these ideas, of course, being inspired by world events. All right, so please be mindful that you're understanding the connection or the relationship between these three components of the conceptual framework. So make sure that you annotate the question with your content information. All right, so as you can see, mine is quite general, but you would have had artists that you have studied, okay, and artworks that you have studied. So in your annotation, apply these so that you're more specific, and it will give you more direction to how you're actually going to answer this question. If you find you're experiencing difficulty in understanding the relationships between these four agencies, then this might help you. This is just the way I like to think about it. It helped me break down the conceptual framework and how it sort of fit together. So in my understanding, we're looking at the fact that things or events happen in the world, all right? And these have inspired or impacted upon the artist and the ideas that they explore. For this reason, they create artworks, and this becomes the physical or visual representation of these ideas. Okay, these artworks are then put on display, and it causes or provokes a response from the audience. Now, this audience is part of the world, so therefore their response may be influenced by the world or the attitudes and opinions that are currently, I suppose, making up the world, but then they also, on the flip side, may impact or influence upon these very views of the world. Okay, so that is the way that I like to break down the conceptual framework. If it helps you, fantastic. If not, then disregard it. Step 3 requires you to identify the limitations, okay? This is an important step because it can limit the amount of irrelevant information that you present in your response. So I mentioned earlier that when you're looking at the world and the world events, you're going to focus only on those that actually influence the artist, okay? So there's no need to give a historical overview of everything that was happening at the time if it doesn't relate to the artist. So that's one limitation. Another limitation is within the content area that we're focusing on, because as we've identified, we're only looking at the artist, world, and artworks. Audience, the fourth agency, is not presented in this question. For this reason, you do not need to concern yourself with the response of the audience. Just leave that out and focus more on the relationship between artist, world, and artworks. If you find that even after your annotations you're still struggling to understand what the question is asking you to do, then reword it. Put it into language that you understand so that when you're writing your response, you can go back up to your reworded question in order to gain direction and ensure that you are, in fact, answering the question. Okay, so for example, if I was to reword the sample question, I would break it up into two questions actually. The first one, what was happening in the world at the time that inspired the artist? Okay, so this still relates to the question requirements because I'm looking at the relationship firstly between the world and the artist. And secondly, how is this evident in their artworks? Okay, so I am looking at how this inspiration is presented in a physical and visual means through the artworks they create. Okay, so when I'm writing my response, I can go back up and say, have I actually answered these questions? Okay, so to recap, when breaking down a question, firstly you want to identify the verb. You then want to identify the content area. Again, in visual arts, this would be practice, conceptual framework, or the frames. Thirdly, you want to identify any limitations that can help you reduce the amount of irrelevant information you include. And step 4, which is of course optional, only use it if it benefits you, is to reword the question to language you understand. Now, in terms of beginning your response, I would begin with a brainstorm where you list the key ideas or evidence you intend to write about. And then just do a quick point on how you intend to link this to the question requirements. If you feel that you need additional assistance with essay structure, then see the Structuring an Extended Response video tutorial on this YouTube channel. Thanks guys, and good luck.